The title of this exhibition is Claudia Andujar, La luta Yanomami. This is an exhibition to tell the story of this extraordinary woman that had to fly away from Europe because of the wars and became a photojournalist in Brazil. She discovered the Yanomami people and really decided to quit her job as a photojournalist and explore and stay there for a while.
J'ai connu les Yanomami en 1970. Ça m'a pris à peu près 2 ans pour comprendre les Yanomami. Tout leur système de chamanisme, leur voyage dans la forêt, bon, c'est leur vie, enfin c'est ça que j'ai voulu connaître pour pouvoir photographier. Je voulais toujours pénétrer dans la culture et après interpréter ce que je comprenais de la culture. Ce qui m'intéresse, c'est de comprendre les gens. Je veux comprendre leur monde.
Elle a été absolument fascinée et elle a décidé d'y vivre. C'est rare les photographes qui viennent et disent « bon, je passerai autant de temps qu'il faut pour gagner la confiance des gens avant de prendre des photos ou de faire un travail ». J'ai constamment entendu parler les Yanomami de cette Naboyoma, cette femme blanche qui avait fait ci, qui était là et qui faisait des photos et qui avait peur de rien et qui était tellement sympathique. Et bon, c'était la première femme blanche qui voyait circuler sur leur territoire. Ça avait été un événement.
The Yanomami, they live in the very north of Brazil, in the frontier of Brazil and Venezuela. There are more than 300 communities. They speak 5 different languages. It was a country that was very isolated from our context and that unfortunately faced a very brutal contact in the 70s when the dictatorship in Brazil decided to develop the Amazon, which they call an empty Greenland. And this is when she meets Davi Kopenawa Yanomami, which is a very important spokesperson for the Yanomami people. Together they travel the world and they try to denounce and to raise awareness for the situation that was going on in Brazil at that time.
A luta vai continuar até fim. Eu não tô lutando só para terra Yanomami, não. Eu estou lutando para os Yanomami, índio do Brasil, índio dos Estados Unidos, índio da Sami. Eu estou lutando também as crianças. A criança precisa a floresta vivo em pé, certo? O povo Yanomami é melhor cuidar a quarteão da nossa floresta. Não é para derrubar, não é para negociar, não é para vender. Terra para nós, futuro geração vai precisar. Um dia acontecer, o governo, o mundo inteiro, acabar a nossa floresta amazônica, vocês vão dizer que voltou Yanomami, que estava lá dentro. Nós somos pouco índio protege a alma da terra, mundo geral.
For me, it was a big honor to be able to bring Claudia and Davi to this exhibition and to Paris to see their work and their story and to show to people in Europe who those amazing people were. The first part of the show is Claudia's accomplishment as a photographer in trying to interpret photographically a culture that didn't have any kind of photographic representation. I find this picture extraordinary because it is part of what Claudia is trying to accomplish. It's just a very common scene. It's a small boy looking at her. So when you read how they describe the Shapiri, the spirits, as a very small man, very shiny with his outline lights, and you see this picture, you think probably she was trying to achieve that. She was using infrared film to photograph, and it was very interesting because infrared was a film that was developed by the military at that time, and it was used actually by the Brazilian government to survey the land of Brazil to try to find the richness of the soil. This is part of the violence that was then generated against the Yanomami, and I thought it was very interesting to see how Claudia was also using those techniques, those scientific films, to create another atmosphere and to suggest a more dreamlike world through her pictures. The Yanomami culture is very interesting because it looks at the world in a spectral double. Every being on the earth has another representative being that we call spirits, but it's not properly a spirit. And you look at some of Claudia's pictures, you really think that she was trying to photograph and to represent something of that spirituality that was invisible to a Western woman. This room is dedicated to the shamanistic rituals, what the Yanomami call the reahu, which are not only rituals that are dedicated to a person that died, but also dedicated to establishing new alliances between the different communities of the Yanomami.
Então, essa aqui, quando está acabando, arrancou mandioca, ralou macaxeira, fizemos um beiju, está tudo pronto, é o final da festa. Os homens, pajé, não pajé, eles vão tomar yaquana. Ele que está dando para ele. Ele que está dando para ele. E o outro daqui, ele vai dar para ele. No Iuayu, o Carrolayu. Isso aí é costume antigo, não é nada que mostrou, não é igreja que ensinou a tomar yaquana, não. Isso aí é no início do mundo que o mamo deixou para Yanomami usar, ao final da festa. Aí que tá ruando.
O que houve com ele?
Isso aqui, ele tá... a força da yaquana levou a alma dele. Está conhecendo as montanhas, conhecendo os araras, conhecendo a terra, conhecendo o rio, o sol, a lua, tudo ele está olhando. Ele mergulhou para conhecer a tronco da terra, a tronco da sabedoria, como a terra nasceu. A ponta venenosa com yaquana, mata. Mas quem quer saber tomar. Mas um dia eu vou te sobrar para você aprender.
These portraits were created by Claudia around 1974, 75, 76. She was very determined to photograph most of the people that she knew in the region of the Catrimani. For every person that she was photographing, she's using an entire roll of film, so she takes a lot of time in trying to get closer, in establishing a very deep emotional bonds. You can see how intimate and what a confidence they had through the eyes of the people that were photographed. I think Claudia always talks about being a very lonely person because of her origins and because of her personal history. Part of her family was exterminated during the Second World War, and she felt she had no real roots. And she was always looking for those roots, and I think she found roots and family and affection among the Yanomami. At a certain point, Claudia asked for the Yanomami to try to represent some of their culture also. So she brings loads of paper and pen to the Yanomami region and really start to talk to people and ask them to tell their own stories. And she creates this amazing mess of drawings, hundreds of drawings, where every different Yanomami person talks about their own mythology, their day-to-day life, things that are important to them. And I think it was a very important move for Claudia because she's really giving the representational direction and authorship to the Yanomami.
Pian pianino allora con l'aiuto dei disegni sono riuscito a farmi raccontare cose. Ogni tanto quando c'era qualcosa che io non riuscivo a capire bene e chiedevo fammi un disegno su questo argomento, su questa cosa. E allora lui me lo faceva e poi allora nel disegno apparivano dettagli, cosette che io segnavo a matita sul retro del disegno esattamente nel posto che corrispondeva a quella parte, in modo da non dimenticare poi che cos'erano. In questo modo sono riuscito a costruire un po' della mitologia, insomma, del mondo, dello spazio, dell'universo Yanomami. Ed è quello che è importante anche guardando i disegni, sapere che il disegno non è una fotografia, il disegno è una storia molte volte, alle volte può essere anche un po' un ritratto di qualche situazione, ma il più delle volte ci sono varie cose che succedono in tempi anche diversi e che sono messi nello stesso disegno. E questo è stata una cosa che abbiamo dovuto poi interrompere quasi completamente quando è arrivata la strada.
Se ela não tiver húngaro chegado aqui, nós já não sofreria muito. Então ela vem salvar nós. Ela vem encontrar mim, para ficar amigo. É assim que aconteceu.
In 1977 is a very dramatic year for Claudia because the dictatorship starts to build roads in the place where she was working. And for denouncing the violence that the workers brought into the Amazon land, Claudia is expelled by the government and she cannot go back.
C'était la période d'un gouvernement militaire donc, qui avait ouvert tout ce réseau routier en Amazonie. Donc il y avait toutes sortes de problèmes évidemment avec les Yanomami, des épidémies, de la prostitution, tous les jeunes gens qui allaient mendier dans les chantiers, qui abandonnaient leurs plantations, la chasse, etc. Et donc ça a commencé vraiment la lutte pour la terre Yanomami. Et c'est à ce moment-là que, peu après, on s'est joints, Carlos, Claudia et moi, on a fondé la CCPY et mené toute cette lutte pour la défense territoriale.
À partir de tout cela, j'ai décidé, avec quelques amis, de lutter contre l'invasion de leurs terres. Ça a changé ma vie.
1 year after Claudia is expelled, she's able to come back with an authorization, and when she comes back, she's already an activist. She's not working with art anymore. She's setting health programs, she's organizing protests, she's only photographing now and then to instrumentalize her political actions, either as an instrument of denouncement, as a weapon to press, or as an instrumental thing for the health programs. These portraits were made for the identification cards because the Yanomami don't have a proper name as we are used to. They had to photograph everyone and put this number so they could really trace and track the medical history of that person. She just wants to act as quickly as she can because she knows that the viruses and the diseases are spreading and they need to do something to prevent that. 1989, there is a dramatic turn on this story because the government of Brazil, after a lot of pressure, decides to demarcate the Yanomami land, but they decide to demarcate it in an isolated way It's 19 very small islands. So Claudia and Davi Kopenawa and the CCPY and all these people that were involved in pressing, they create a very big protest exhibition. One of the features of that exhibition was a projection that Claudia organized, that I think it was also a way for her to reconnect her activism and her aesthetical production. She had stopped photograph for some years now, but she looks back at her archive and she creates a narrative, a sequence narrative, where she tells the story of a society that lives in harmony in the forest of Brazil, but is then contacted by the Western civilization and is facing a dramatic violence and is being exterminated by this very violent contact. Today, there are about 28,000 Yanomamis in Brazil and around 15,000 Yanomamis in the Venezuela part of the land. It's one of the few Brazilian indigenous populations that have such a big land demarcated and protected. It's a sad story that we had elections last year and our president is challenging this demarcation, and it's bringing back all the ignorance and all the violence that all this generation have to fight against during the dictatorship through the new politics.
Ele está pisando o lei dele. Ele não está respeitando o lei que eles fizeram. Ele está querendo acabar o pulmão da Amazônia, o pulmão da Terra planeta. Esse é que o governo quer.
E também eu queria dizer para vocês assim, futuro é muito difícil. A gente tem que pensar sociedade não indígena e sociedade povo da floresta, como nós vamos viverá, para procurar solução, como vivemos em paz.
Que bom.
Tchau, tchau.
Amigo.
Tá.
Obrigado, viu?
De nada.